Welcome back, guys.
Hello, hello.
My name is Michael,
And I'm Jeffrey.
and today we have a special guest with us. We're going to have an interview with our friend Rich Butler from the RAGEWorks podcast network. Say hi, Richard.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Here in our Michael and Jeffrey's Top 10, we usually have a Top 10 countdown of our favorite pop culture topics and subjects. We've been wanting to get into more interviews, just to try to interview more people and get more people on our show, spread our podcasts out there into the world, and, just work together.
Absolutely.
Work together.
Collaboration is the name of the game.
That's right. So we're just going to get right into it. Rich here has a podcast network called RAGEWorks, where they have, how many podcasts do you have on that network?
We are on 12 so far. 12 of them, always looking for great partners to have on board, always looking for great shows to work with. One thing that people kind of don't get with how we operate is we take a lot of the heavy lifting out with our podcast network. So what we do is people come to us and they're like, hey, I want to start a podcast. I don't want to deal with iTunes. I don't want to deal with Spotify. I just want to record and create great content. We, in turn, allow a podcaster to use our audience, because we have a separate network feed, and use our audience to build their show while their show goes live on all those other platforms. You guys know it takes time to get on iTunes. It takes a couple weeks to get on Spotify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we take all of that out. We let a podcaster use our audience, and it allows for that crossover from other shows. So if someone's listening to a show about sports and you're doing a show about crypto and they're into it, they're gonna follow that show. So we provide, it's almost like a audience generator for somebody coming on board, and we handle everything: production, distribution, show notes to a point. We do all of that, and then when the show is live, when somebody's podcast is live on its own, we flip the switch to syndication. So what it'll allow you to do is people will still have their shows doing whatever they want to do, and then we're syndicating that podcast on the network so that people that are listening to other shows on the network can continue checking out a new show for the first time.
Awesome.
So it's not like the traditional join a network and you'll get access to blah blah blah. Like, we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
We use the network model to help people get the ball rolling. And then I'm sure people are going to ask, well, how do you make money? How do you get advertisers? Listen, it's your show. It's your job to grow your show. Our job is to go out there and get it in front of people. It's no different than having a show on a television network, if you think about it. Yeah, the show's supposed to bring eyes to the network as a whole, but the network's ratings are the show's ratings are dependent on the quality of the show. So I always tell people, like, you come in, we'll try and get advertisers for you, and then obviously there'll be some sort of a split. But if you go and you're a great podcast and you get your own advertisers and we're not involved, then it's 100% yours. Like, it doesn't matter, So we kind of do it that way because I think it's respectful of people that come on board and are worried about it, especially because not everybody's, swimming in money to launch their shows, So we try to be respectful of that. And we tell them, like, hey, this is a flat fee. We cover production, everything else. The rest is on you.
All right. Well, that's Rich's RageWorks podcast network. What kind of shows do you have on there, Rich?
We have a little bit of everything. It's funny. People look at RageWorks and it's an acronym. It stands for Rants About Gaming, Entertainment, and the Works.
Oh, okay.
So, when a lot of people that aren't familiar, they're like, well, what does the works mean? If you grew up in New York, or you grew up in the 80s, you probably heard, hey, let me get a pizza with the works on it, which is, let me get a pizza with everything on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we kind of cover that. So we have shows: sports, wrestling, MMA, cryptocurrency, blockchain stuff, some lifestyle shows. So we try to give a mix of everything, because it's like anything else, you don't turn on CBS or NBC and just have one genre of show on there. You have many.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So in your last podcast, you guys are talking about, your origin stories and, how you got into things. I know me, I just went and asked Jeffrey. You know, I love Joe Rogan podcast. That's the first podcast I actually started listening to. Like, oh, okay, here's Joe Rogan. Here's the MMA guy, right?
Right.
So I was like, oh, okay, that's cool.
I'm
I
for
yeah, and I didn't even know he was a comedian or did anything else. I just thought he was a Fear Factor guy or he was the MMA
Ah,
guy. And then I started listening to his podcast and just all of the different guests that he has on the show is just like a crazy scramble of just like unique and different guests.
yep.
And I thought that was really interesting that people wanted to go and talk to them and spread the word kind of. So that kind of got me into podcasting. I went I went and asked a couple of friends. It didn't work out, and then I had my best friend Jeffrey here, and I thought, why didn't I even ask Jeffrey in the first place? So that's how I got into it, or me and Jeffrey. How did you get into podcasting?
Much like you, I started like a listener way back in 2006. It was when podcasts first debuted on iTunes. And at the time, I was like, what is this podcast stuff? And I'm like, wow, it's people just doing shows about different things. So I started just punching in all the things I was into, seeing what kind of podcasts were there. And I came across a group of guys out of Cleveland, and they did a show called Video Game News Radio. And the thing about it was that it had that vibe, like when you're in a barber shop and everybody's just like talking shop and hanging out. And I'm like, man, this is great. It's like just a bunch of people talking about video games, but not doing it like G4 at the time or any of these other like IGNs or GameSpot making it super professional. They're just there like, hey, this game sucks. Yeah, why did it suck? Ah, blah, blah, blah. Like it just worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I started listening consistently and started engaging with their podcast. And they were like, hey, man, do you happen to have Skype? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. And they were like, oh, you should call into a show one day. So I called in and they're seeing the New Yorkness of my presentation, and they're like, "Man, I love like that East Coast. You should call in when you can." And they'd have me call in to talk about wrestling or talk about UFC stuff or certain games I was playing, whatever the case may be. And then over time, they were like, "Dude, you should do this. You should do your own podcast." And I'm like, can't don't have the time or the energy or the effort, or I don't think I'm good. All the usual
Yeah.
negative self-talk that we all know and love. But one of their listeners, a guy, funny enough, his handle was Soiled. He says to me, he reaches out, he goes, listen, man, I'm in Canada, I want to do a podcast, just real informal on Skype. You could call in and, we'll just chop it up about a couple different things. You down? And I said, hey, just happy to help out. So did a few episodes with him. Same thing happened. He's like, man, you really should do a podcast. And I'm like, not doing it. And I'm like, this is really the universe kind of just telling me like, man, just do it.
Just
So I
do
went,
it.
I bought a cheapo Logitech headset, USB headset, found Audacity, and recorded like the first episode, which I'm sure was complete trash at the time. But I just kept at it. And the thing about it was hard back then to even know like your download numbers or anything. Like, yeah, we had Libsyn, which was like one of the podcast hosting companies at the time and still active and cranking. And they had metrics, and I saw the numbers climbing, and I'm like, I guess I'm doing something right. So what happened was I got burned out a little bit, but I kept on. And in 2009, a company called Blog Talk Radio popped up on the scene, and they reached out to me, and they're like, hey, we see you have a podcast. How would you like to do it live? I'm like, I don't know about that. But I liked, I grew up listening to like Stern or O&A.
Yeah.
So like the live model was kind of cool. So I was like, you know what? Let me check this out. So they gave me like a week trial, and I reached out to a buddy of mine that was a moderator for MySpace at the time. And I said, listen, I said,
MySpace.
yeah, exactly. Just real dated. So I go, listen, you're a mod. Can you do me a solid and just work the screening room to screen calls? He goes, yeah, man, that'd be cool. I'll do that. So he would screen calls, and it just changed the entire dynamic of the podcast because now we were broadcasting live from 11 p.m. Eastern to 2 a.m. And we were doing same thing, 4 topics: MMA, wrestling, video games, and entertainment. four segments across that time frame, and did it live, and it just was a game changer. We had like a full functioning chat room. People were in there. People would call in if they were into something or they disagreed. And it was great for getting guests, because back then podcasting was still like taboo. I don't want to do that. It's BS. And when they heard, the guests could call in and stuff, they're like, oh, like a radio show. And I'm like, I was like an internet radio show, because people still didn't really know what a podcast was, or they just would thumb their nose at it because they're like, this is some crap. But needless to say, that changed the game. We had different UFC fighters, pro wrestlers, actors, people from the gaming community, people who we were a fan of. Plus, the listeners got to be involved. We did some cool events. It was amazing. And the funny thing was, I did that for 400 episodes, and I complicated my life because I added video to it too. So here we are, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Show wraps at 2. I start editing the audio. Then I got to edit the video when we added video. So I'd be done by 3:30, 4 o'clock, because I would edit, type up show notes, and publish like right after. And I'd wake up at 7 a.m., 7:30, boom, get ready, go to work, and full-time job.
Yeah.
Punching a clock like anybody else, and then podcast. And I was doing the podcast once a week. And then I started feeling burned out, because that's a long, long time. So I broke it up into 2 days. So Wednesdays and Thursdays, 90-minute episodes apiece. Same 4 topics, just MMA and wrestling Wednesdays, gaming and entertainment Thursdays. And I'm like, all right, this will make things easier. And the burnout was just still there, like the exhaustion. I'm like, man, this shit's not fun anymore. So I was like, you know what? I'm reaching 400 episodes. I think this is a great opportunity for me to close it out. So along the journey, you got to keep up with the Joneses. You need a website. Oh, you need this, you need that, you need social media. So along the way, like, people were like, hey man, how can I help out? And I'm like, we always need writers. We were covering Comic-Con. We were doing a bunch of stuff. And the content that we were doing outgrew the podcast. So I'm sitting one night and I'm like, man, like, my podcast was My Take Radio. It was just my take on those subjects. And I'm like, man, I'm outgrowing, like, we're doing so much, and just My Take Radio isn't everything. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, what am I into? What am I into? How can I come up with a name to rebrand? So people used to always be like, like, people always used to make fun. Like, I'd get mad about things like, he's just raging on the radio, or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh man. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, you know what? When RAGEWorks, and I'm sitting there and that just clicked. And then I'm like, all right, but what does that mean? And then I was like, Rants About Gaming, Entertainment, in the Works, because it still encompasses what I do. And then that became like the brand, the all-encompassing brand. And I rebranded the website, still kept my podcast the same. And as the podcast, like I said, was reaching the end, a lot of the writers on the site were like, man, Rich, I want to start a podcast. Can you teach me? Cool, no problem. Boom. Taught a couple guys. They're like, hey, we want to do a podcast. And they all started doing the podcast. And I said, you know what? Tell you what, my podcast is winding down. I have this really, 10+ year RSS feed that has a built-in audience. Tell you what, let's flip the switch, make it a podcast network. I'll take care of everything for your shows. You guys focus on the content, and we'll go from there. And I'm like, you guys got to pay for podcast hosting anyway, so I'll find a hosting company that's network friendly. You guys pay me a couple of bucks. I'll edit. I'll make you guys sound good, and then we'll go from there. And I use my show as the foundation, because it was the legacy podcast, and then just started promoting that and saying, hey, we're going to have this podcast network. We're going to have these podcasts, blah, 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 blah. So when episode 400 came and went, it was just a natural progression to flip that switch and turn it into the podcast network. And the funny thing was, one of our guys, Jay, he was doing the regular season sportscast, and he was so good. And he had a wrestling segment called Turnbuckle Tabloid. And I used to listen to the wrestling segment. I'm like, man, this guy, he's crushing it, man. His wrestling stuff is good. So I reached out and I go, listen, man, I'm wrapping up the podcast. I'm like, why don't you turn Turnbuckle Tabloid into a podcast? And he goes, man, I was going to ask if I could do that. And I said, man, rock on, let's do it. So when I wrapped up my podcast, he launched Turnbuckle Tabloid. Turnbuckle Tabloid, I just released for them their 375th episode.
Wow.
That dropped today. So pretty much almost all of the folks that are on our network, most of them, their shows are in triple digits. And even the folks that have retired shows, their shows were in triple digits. And it's been awesome. And then what I did during COVID was I turned that methodology of the podcast network into a service for other podcasters. So now it's like, if you got a show idea, you want to start a show, you don't know where to start, we'll help you out. We'll do everything, and you'll get our audience, we'll get your content, everybody wins. And if it doesn't work out, which people are like, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? Then I'll give you your RSS feed, I'll give you all your audio, and off into the distance you go. And that's it. It's that simple. Like,
Mm.
we don't own nothing, we don't want to own nothing, we just want to help folks get their dream started.
No, yeah,
That's
that's awesome. Like one of the things that we're having trouble with, like we have a top 10 show, right? And there's like an unlimited number of top 10 things that you can talk about. Um,
absolutely.
but it seems like sometimes we're trying to think of the content or trying to think of, what we should talk about next, and there's all these topics but we just can't get into one. Like what helped you create or like get that content, like pick, this is what we should do this week, this is what we should do that week.
So I kept a running document. um I used to use Microsoft OneNote. I used to have it on my phone, used to have it on my desktop in my house, my desktop at work when I was in an office, and things would come up, and I just have all four segments, and I just drop links, drop articles, drop text in there, and then Tuesday night before I would do the shows Wednesday, I would sit down and I would start culling and cutting out stuff that I thought was rubbish, and then I'm like, what stuff I can talk about passionately or elaborate on or make it sound good or add some personality to it or fire up the audience that they want to call in or comment on it in the chat and I can read it. So, it would be like, oh, this wrestler got arrested this week. So that'd be a good one. I'd be like, oh, this guy got arrested, man. Sucks. Nothing is worse than wasted talent. Blah, 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 blah. Then people be like, man, I love that dude. I can't believe he got arrested. And then that creates the conversation. So using that as a baseline with what you're doing, like you just said, there's top tens about everything. But lean into things you like. Always lean into things you like that you can talk about passionately. So, like, I'll give you a great example. Say you're a foodie, right? And you're just into food and you want to do something local. Hey, let's meet up, man, and let's try 10 pizza places this week. 10 pizza places. And you know what? Just for shits and giggles, let's try 15, because that way you're going to cut out the ones that are just completely
Yeah.
trash. And that way you got your nice 10 that you could work with.
Yeah, yeah.
Then what you do right after that is, what did you like? What didn't you like? You could easily just, as you're eating, set up like your phone and put like the voice memo on and just record like you guys just talking about each place. That way you have content to play off of. Then once that's done, you go, all right, this week we're going to do top 10 pizzas in our neighborhood or top 10 pizzas in our town. And there's a 2-layer benefit to that. Number one, you're showcasing local businesses, which may turn into opportunities where they'd be like, hey, man, we heard your podcast. Thanks for talking about us. Would love to work with you guys. Now, all of a sudden, hey, can we sponsor an episode? Can we, have an ad? Can you guys talk about us? Like, yeah, cool. We talk about you guys. Listen, we got X amount of audience. Would love to work something out. Maybe it doesn't even have to be money. That's the other thing about podcasting. It doesn't have to be money. It could be like, hey, man, thanks for this. Check it out, guys. Anytime you guys want to come in, you get free pizza for a month.
Oh yeah.
Like it doesn't always have to be money. Like, that's the problem with a lot of podcasting. Like, people get all hung up on money. And it's like, if you get into this to make money, you're gonna fail. And I say this because it takes a lot of work to make money. Like, to convert podcast listens into money, there's a lot of work that goes into it. Because if you want to get sponsors, That's hours of you having to be on the phone or emailing or engagement to get somebody to be like, man, I like these guys. I like this top 10 concept. Let me put some money into it. It's a lot of work. But content wise, do that. Top 10 action movies from the 80s. Boom. Sit down. You watch 10 flicks from the 80s. Again, turn on voice memo, do like Mystery Science Theater, watch them, and then use that baseline material to be like, man, top 10 action flicks from the 80s, top 10 sci-fi movies from the 90s, top 10 R&B slow jams. You can't play them obviously because copyright, but still, like, there's an endless cavalcade of material. And then what you do is you break that up and you add like personal touches, personal stories. Like, hey, top 10 pizzerias in our neighborhood. Man, I used to eat at this pizzeria when I was a kid. I used to come here with my mom or with my dad or with my brothers. I'm so glad that I'm here sharing it with you guys. Like, people hear that and then they're like, oh man, I used to eat at that place too. That place is still there. Oh, hey guys, I heard you about this place on this podcast. I wanted to stop by. And then you repurpose that into other content. Maybe, you use TikTok or you use Instagram Reels or you use whatever, the YouTube Shorts, and you're like, hey, we're at this pizzeria. We're checking out this pizza. Check it out, guys. And then just be like, you want to know what we thought? Check out our podcast this week. There's your hook. Then people will do that. Again, I tell people all the time because they're like, well, what platform should I use? Should I be on Instagram? Should I be on the platform that you can generate content for? But remember, all breadcrumbs should lead back to whatever your home base is, your website, your podcast, your email list, whatever it is, breadcrumbs all the way back. Because if Facebook disappears tomorrow and you built your audience on Facebook, it's a wrap. Look at what happens every time the Instagram algorithm changes and you got the girl that all she does is post pretty pictures of herself. Oh, I got 10,000 likes and I got a brand deal. Oh, the algorithm changed. I got 3 likes. Oh, you're not so cool anymore. Yeah, but I have 10,000 fans. You put a post and you get 4 comments. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Zilch. It means donut.
Yeah. Hey, funny enough, Rich, you just went right into my next question. So we do have, so as a smaller podcast, we're trying to, get bigger, get our word out. Kind of already touched on that. What other platforms you're using to, like, spread the word? Because that maybe you can tell me a little bit more. But as a podcast, there's like, I use the comparison to YouTube. Like, if I put, like, say the podcast on YouTube, YouTube will auto recommend it, like, the content to people that might like it.
Yes.
I feel like as a podcast, like, how do they market our podcast out?
Are you using YouTube or just in general?
Just in general, but I was just using YouTube as the example. Like, it's easy for us to do on YouTube. Like, YouTube will do it for us, but past that, I think we have to, like, do our own work, kind of thing.
Funny story about YouTube. I used to put my podcast episodes on YouTube, stationary image with audio, right? And people were like, Rich, why are you wasting your time doing that? Like, it's like 10 views a video, blah, blah, blah. And I go, listen, I'll explain. Back in the day, when people used to work in offices consistently, you know that your office would block access to a lot of stuff on the internet. Couldn't go to Facebook, couldn't go here, couldn't go there, you had access to maybe to YouTube because it was part of Google, or just very, very limited things. So I had a lot of people that said, man, I want to listen to the show at work. I can't. I'll be like, all right, well, what do you get? What's the problem? Oh, your website is blocked. Okay. I'm like, can you listen on your phone? I can't really listen on the phone. Okay. They're like, but we got access to, like, YouTube. I'm like, oh, you have access to YouTube. Literally just 5 minutes of editing. Really, just drop a stationary image. Here's the audio, upload it to YouTube. And people are like, but you're wasting your time and blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not wasting my time. I am engaging with my audience and trying to serve them so that they say, man, he puts a version on the show on YouTube and we could check it out. Look at Joe Rogan, going back to what you guys were saying. Yeah, Joe Rogan's podcast is exclusively on Spotify, but the clips of that show are on YouTube.
Yeah.
And
that's how we found out of them.
Exactly.
That's how I found out.
Yeah, me too.
And think about it. The breadcrumbs are, listen to my podcast. Subscribe on Spotify. You're harnessing other platforms to lead people back to whatever home base you want. and that's it. Now, in terms of just marketing the podcast, you gotta, I tell people, plant your flag everywhere. Doesn't mean you have to engage in every platform, but make sure, like, if you have a name and you want to protect it, like, hey, let me just set up a Twitter account. Let me set up, we're on Pinterest. Like RageWorks is on Pinterest. You know why? Because our articles have photos, comic books, different things. We put them on Pinterest. People click them, comes to the site. One day I got an email from Pinterest. They're like, hey, we'd like to talk to you. I'm like, okay, why? They're like, do you know you have like 150,000 views a month on Pinterest? And I'm like, no. And they're like, yeah, people click your stuff. I'm like, awesome. What does that do for me? Nothing. But again, people are on Pinterest. They're like, oh, this Funko Pop figure is cool. What website is that on? Oh, this guy, he covers pops. Let me see what else he's doing. That's it. That's the hack. And I say that loosely. That's the hack loosely. Because people, they just, I gotta go here, I gotta go there, no. Sure, plant your flag everywhere, like I said, but focus on places that you can nourish, that you can water, plants that you can water. If it's Instagram, then it's Instagram. If it's TikTok, then it's TikTok, whatever it is. And then just, again, hammer it in, put your, whether it's clips from the podcast or behind the scenes content or, elements of the top 10, like, man, we're looking at top 10 toys of the 80s this week, and then just put a photo. Hey, I had this Optimus Prime. I found it at a garage sale. You don't have to buy it at the garage sale, but if you record on your phone for 10 seconds and record it, look at this Optimus Prime, man. So great. Can't wait to share more with you guys on the top 10 this week. Again, you don't even got to buy it. But again, 10 seconds of micro content, 15 minutes of micro content, and then just strip that down, cut, till you get to something that's bite-sized and engaging. All of a sudden, people are like, man, these top 10 guys do talk about everything. Let's see what they got.
So as far as like the internet or podcasting and like YouTube Shorts, TikTok has come out, do you feel like people's attention span has gone less and less?
I'm gonna be frank, and I don't know how you guys edit, but people's attention span is in the toilet.
Yeah.
It is a constant fight for attention, but there are certain things that are consistent, which are people always read email. You always read email, even the garbage. You know that you get a garbage email. You're like, let me open it, see what the hell it is. That's how people fall for so much spam. I mean, for so much email hacking, because they'll be like, oh, let me open this, because again, they get you with the hook. Like, what's this photo of you on the internet? You're like, what photo of me on the internet? Click. Oh no, but that's so you got to look at that. You're like, okay, so what's one? Email list. That's an easy one. Email list is consistent.
How do you? I'm sorry. How did you like start an email list? Like, who did you start with?
I'm gonna tell you right now, my email list game is trash. Like I should be like, when I was like, oh, I should really double down on email. I'm like, what? Who wants to read this crap? But then you start finding things that are useful. So I'm like, so now it's like I try to get an email newsletter out like once a week. And there's plenty of different things, like this company AppSumo, they use a thing called SendFox. It's like $50 lifetime, but they do all the emailing and all the stuff, and they just handle it for you. They create a launch page for you. You capture, it's your job obviously to capture the emails, but then you could just go right in the platform, write a newsletter out every week. And you could do like bite-sized top 10, or you could do like things that you're into that are relevant to the show, or updates. But again, just things that are useful, that are just enough to not bombard someone's inbox. Like if I told you guys, I'm like, man, if I could send you an email once a week about, cool toys or collectibles that are coming out, would you read it? You'd be like, yeah, I'm into, Marvel Legends or Gundams or, things like that. Oh, cool. That's good to have. And again, you're going to open it and take a look. And if you don't like it, you delete it. Like, it's that simple. But, email is a constant. It's just there. A lot of websites now, they do text message, like they'll text you like, hey, there's a new post. Like, I think that's a little spammy, a little douchey, but some people like text message updates, you know, like that's a thing. But again, find what's workable for you that you can maintain. And then, you know, sometimes you got to cheat, you got to rig the system, you got to find like services like Buffer or some of these other services where you can automate a lot of that stuff. Like sometimes, like I'll write blog posts for the RageWorks website. I'll wake up Sunday morning or Monday night, and you know it'll be like 2 a.m. and I just dump a bunch of posts in there, and I have them auto published to our LinkedIn page, our Facebook fan page, our Facebook group, etc. Maybe that's it. Maybe you want to build a Discord for your show and then break it down by stuff you talk about, and then maybe you want to foster a community there. There's a bunch of different ways. Going back to what we were saying before we even started recording, it's like go on other podcasts, be a guest, be of service, bring value, go into podcast groups, go into groups of stuff that you're into, engage, be part of the community, and then like, hey man, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, you know, I talk about it on the podcast once in a while. Oh, you have a podcast? What's it called? And obviously be respectful of the group, because a lot of groups, they'll be like, don't come in here and spam your crap, because we don't want you to do that. But if you say, hey, you know, feel free to reach out, I'll tell you more about what I do. Then two things come out of that. You get a one-to-one connection, which never hurts. And two, you can pitch yourself in a non-douchey way.
Mm.
But cool.
Your podcast is Toys and Tech. Why did you go with Toys and Tech? And then, well, one of my favorite toys right now that I'm playing with is my Oculus. I just got it back. We moved into a new space, so I have more room to play. Jeffrey and I were talking about maybe doing some kind of VR, conference. So maybe we can do the podcast on VR.
That would be cool. See?
You know what I mean? Like trying different things. So that's one of my favorite things. Ever since I was a kid, I was like, wouldn't that be so cool to be able to like actually be part of VR, be in VR, like virtual reality. Like it's when we were younger, it was just like this sci-fi thing. Like, oh man,
it's Tron. You watch Tron, you're like, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
The Matrix. You know, it's always funny. I always tell people, you know, the Matrix is Tron with better special effects.
Right.
You know, because think about it. You go into a virtual world, and your actions in that world may affect on the outside world. And if you die in there, you die outside. It's Tron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
You know, but for me, I did Toys and Tech because going back to what I was talking about, like I always found myself watching desk setup videos, how people built their podcast studios. I was a big fan growing up for people that watch like Mr. Rogers. He used to do an episode of like how crayons were made.
Oh yeah.
And I thought it was like the dopest thing ever.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, man, this is so wild. Again, you don't care because you're like, it's a crayon. Who gives a shit? But then you're like, that's pretty cool how they're made. Yeah. And I thought about that, and then when I was thinking about coming back and starting to do a podcast, I was like, I want something that's less pressure, meaning not live. I could do it bi-weekly. I can have an endless supply of people to talk to. And I thought, I'm like, all right, well, I'm an entrepreneur. People always ask me questions on what I do or how to balance your day job or how you manage family. I'm like, people want to know. They want to know the story, but they also want to know what you use. What are your resources? What mic do you use to podcast? What are your favorite headphones? What mixer do you like? What services do you use to edit, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm like, man, like that scratches an itch for me creatively. Then I said, but nobody just wants to hear an hour of business shit, So I'm like, how do I break that up? And I'm like, man, people have toys. And I'm like, yeah, but not everyone has toys. And then I said, but the definition of toys is vast. Because that's one of the things I always say in the intro. It's like, listen, for me, toys could be, action figures or Funko Pops, but for somebody else, they might collect samurai swords. Those are their toys. Kitchen knives, jet skis. If you're balling like that, it might be cars, might be houses. You might be a house flipper. Those are your toys. They bring you joy. They make you excited to wake up every day. So that was kind of like the balance that I found. And I said, you know what? This is a great way to do that. And plus, like when people are talking about their business, it's hard for people to switch off to talk about themselves. So when you ingrain the two, it humanizes that person, because somebody will be like, "Oh man, you're into that? Cool, I'm into that too." And then it makes a commonality that when people finish listening to that conversation, they're like, "Man, I like that this dude's so passionate about Play-Doh. I'm gonna go and see what else he's doing. Oh, this guy likes Legos. Man, I like Legos too. Let me see what kind of Legos he's building. Let me give him a follow on Instagram." So, scratching my creative itch and checking off my mental and personal boxes, but also giving value to the space, because I get to showcase creators, showcase people like you guys or anybody else that reached out that would want to do the podcast. Because now people will be like, "Man, they do that? That's cool. Let me go check them out."
For sure. Awesome. Um, so, like, what's one of the biggest things that you didn't really expect from coming out of? I mean, you've been podcasting since 2006, right? So,
Yep.
like, when you first started, what are some things that you didn't expect you to maybe like editing? Like for me, I didn't expect editing to take as long as it does. Um, so that's like one thing for me. Like, what's something that you didn't realize
How much
about
prep?
podcasting?
How much prep? Definitely a prep. Editing. Here's the funny thing about editing. There's two schools of thought with editing. You either edit too much or you don't edit enough.
Mm.
So I tell people, think about when you're listening to things or you're watching television. Like, television is edited to convey a message in as quickly as possible. But if you listen to like a live show, even Rogan, like you hear Rogan and he's talking, and sometimes he'll misstate something or whatever, and he'll come back and be like, "Oh yeah, I just found out that that's not true," blah 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 blah. So I tell people, think about how you want to be conveyed. If you have crutch words, like as a New Yorker, is one of them. I remember I went to a podcast finding every I said, and I'm like, man, I said it like 30 times. Let me edit them all out. But then it takes away that character that's you. Or if you have a crutch word, your crutch word, whatever it is, like or whatever. Sure, you can delete all of them. But again, very formulaic, very robotic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want your audience to connect with you, you want those flubs here and there, like, "Oh man, I messed that up." If it's something too big, then yeah, cut it out. You're recording, you mess something up, you clap to mark where that mess up is. You go back, there's the clap, this is the mess up, delete it, move on.
Mm.
Listen, the amount of time it takes people to edit sometimes is the amount of time it takes for your podcast or your content to die. Because you're going to be like, "Oh, I got to edit this shit. I got to do this video. I got to do this podcast." If you're leading with a groan or the deep sigh, you're doing too much.
Mm.
It should just be like, "Let me just edit this show real quick and bang it out." Boom. All of a sudden, people are like, they'll see your content just takes a life of its own. It's human, but it's clean. I always tell people, make sure your audio is clean. Make sure your audio is quiet. Make sure your voice is projecting accordingly. Look at a YouTube video about mic technique. Look at a YouTube video about room setup. Little things that can level up a podcast. Oh, my room has a lot of echo. All right, buy a rug. Go to Five Below and buy a rug. Go to Harbor Freight and find some moving blankets and hang them where over your curtains when you record.
Mm.
Things like that. Just little things. A moving blanket in a local Harbor Freight might be like $10. If you can't spend $10 on your show, then you shouldn't be doing a show.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not telling you go buy the $500 mixer, the $300 microphone. I started with a USB headset in 2006 that I literally paid $20 for in Staples. Audacity is free.
Mm.
Free to edit, super powerful. Go watch some YouTube videos on it.
Yeah, that's how I learned. Yeah.
Stop watching Doja Cat twerk on TikTok for 5 minutes and start following some creators and seeing what they're doing, seeing their thought process, because that's where TikTok and these platforms come in handy. You get a lot more behind the scenes human content. Like, yeah, there's guys that will go and they'll edit something super pretty and whatever, but You want the guy that says, "Oh, I'm shooting wildlife today. I got with me my Sony camera, and this is the lens I'm using." All of a sudden, you're like, "Man, that guy's setup is cool to take photos of animals, but what if I just want to take photos of my kids? Oh man, I can still take photos because the camera he's using is good for things moving fast. My kids move fast. Let me take, like, again, you find commonalities and applications that work for you. That's the problem. People watch Joe Rogan. Look at his setup. Look at his studio. Look at this. Joe Rogan got deep ass pockets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't. You might have your paycheck and you got bills to pay. The bank doesn't care that you're a good podcaster. The bank cares that the bills are paid. So you got to focus on that, but also do not let it impact your show negatively. And more importantly, be consistent. If you tell your audience new episodes come out Fridays, new episodes better come out Fridays. Because guess what? If I'm looking forward to Game of Thrones and that doesn't come on that Friday night, I'm pissed because I'm like, yo, I was hyped for this episode. Now they stopped it because the president is doing a speech or whatever. And then when it comes back on after the speech is over, the episode's not even there. You're like, come on, man. And you're pissed off. Put yourself in the shoes of your audience because your content might be getting someone through a workout, might be getting someone through a commute to work, might be getting someone through, a day at the office. Be respectful of their time. Because they're giving that time to you.
All right. Well, Rich, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. A lot of good insight here. A lot of, I learned a lot, for sure. I learned a lot today.
Nope.
Just so you have your RAGEWorks podcast. This is Rich Butler, guys. He's he does a podcast at Toys
and Tech
of the Trade, where he talks about all the different toys, all your different favorite toys. My name is Michael.
I'm Jeffrey.
We got Rich here. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good one.